I recently released a 47-minute documentary entitled Voicemails from Strangers. It was the first feature-length doc I've ever made. It took me about a month to put together, and today I'm going to explain how I did it. First step was to find a concept, and for this project I wanted to focus on connecting strangers through the human voice. The form this concept took changed from when I first envisioned it. If you check out this video on my channel, I explain what happened in more detail, but to put things in a nutshell, originally I wanted to document phone calls I shared with my subscribers, but after the experiment started, I wound up with 6,081 voicemails in my inbox. At this point, I shifted the focus away from the conversations I had, which were mostly cordial but rushed, to the voicemail collection, which covered a lot more intimate and in-depth subject matter. So after some reworking, I settled upon this final concept: create as pure a slice of life documentary as possible. Start the movie by explaining how the voicemails got in my inbox, and then for the rest of the movie, share a selection of them with the audience. No commentary, no omnipotent narration, just stories. Raw, honest, laid before viewers to hear and contemplate. Voicemails from strangers. Concept locked. Step 2 was obvious. I needed to listen to and document the voicemails. Seemed simple enough, but in practice this proved challenging. Documentaries, they cover real-life people and real-life subject matter. It's easy to become emotionally invested in the story that you're telling or the people that you're chronicling. With this project, I was literally listening to thousands of stories, plenty of them stressful or heartbreaking at worst, and it's tough to listen to a person unfold their life to you in a 30-second message, only to be pulled to another person and another life seconds later. I didn't anticipate just how emotionally draining this whole process would be. Halfway through the list, I almost considered slowing down the project or even scrapping it completely. It felt like too big of a mountain for me to try to climb alone, but eventually I realized that in some way I owed it to the strangers who called. Strangers so willing to share such close and personal pieces of themselves. I owed it to them to do something meaningful with the messages they left. The deeper and deeper I got into this documentation process, the more important it became to see the movie through to completion. The story of these strangers meant something to me, and I knew it would mean something to others. 6,081 voicemails later, I was certain this was a film worth making. Step 3, condense the material. 6,081 audio recordings is a daunting task. It took me a solid 4 days to listen to all of them, from which I selected about 300 that I felt were compelling enough to share with viewers. This doesn't mean that the other 5,700 some messages were lacking or boring or unimportant. Quite the opposite. Some of these messages were just a bit too intimate for my tastes. Personal information and vulnerabilities were revealed by many callers, and it made me feel exploitative to include them in the movie. I didn't feel comfortable sharing such sensitive material, so as a result, plenty of messages that were sent to me, they never made it onto my shortlist. The 300 that did were re-listened to. A lot of the calls included personal messages to me that wouldn't be relevant or meaningful to the layperson, so I knew I would cut these parts out. The trick was figuring out how to edit such messages so that they still made sense after removing these moments. Some calls upon second listening simply didn't convey a clear message. A lot of them were, for better or worse, redundant. Obviously, this is no fault of the callers. A lot of them are going through similar things, but I wanted to make sure a wide variety of voices could be represented in the final film. As an example, I probably had 20 calls in the 300 from students about to graduate, voicemails that detailed their worries about adulthood, employment, paying rent. Including all 20 of these would have lessened the emotional impact upon the audience, so I used only 2 or 3 of them in the final movie. All of these cuts were simply personal determinations made by me in the moment. This is the editing process, scouring your available resources and refining them again and again until you're left with something that properly and efficiently conveys the desired story. Runtime was certainly a factor that I was constantly mindful of throughout the entire process. I experimented with different drafts of the call log, originally a 70-minute cut, but that seemed to drag halfway through. 30 minutes felt too short. It's hard to judge this kind of thing. After 2 days of constant winnowing, I settled upon 135 voicemails that would be used in the final movie. This brought me to step 4, create a rough cut. In other words, now that I had my final voicemails, I needed to intercut them in a way that formed a coherent narrative. I wanted voicemails that included the time of day to be played chronologically, so the movie begins with calls of people waking up, halfway through people are out to lunch, and towards the end of the film, people are reflecting on the events of the day. I also wanted to take the audience on sort of an emotional roller coaster. Some calls were happy, some were sad, some were frustrating, some melancholy. I played around with finding a call order that didn't stock too much of one emotion up front, but instead had sort of a flow to it. I can't really explain what I mean by this. Basically, I wanted the calls to form sort of an unspoken narrative, something that would keep people watching, eager to hear the next stranger's message and the next, never wanting to ever really end. Audience emotion and audience attention is something that's always on the forefront of my mind, and with only voicemails and no supporting narration to work with, I had to be careful. A day or two later, I had the calls lined up in the order that I wanted. So the next step was to add some music. Now, this is normally done in the latter stages of development, but because this is a documentary centered around the audio experience, I had to get this locked down right after the voicemails were fully assembled. I spend a lot of time listening to music during my day-to-day to find tracks that convey just the right emotion. If I stumble upon a particular song that has a certain, say, retrospective feel to it, I store it in my collection, and I put a note of this next to it in case the need for such a tune ever comes up in the future. As you make more and more audio-visual things, the greater your music library grows. Now, there are plenty of royalty-free services out there. I wanted to make sure that I used music in this movie that I could retain the rights to for years to come. You can never underestimate just how important music is in a film. It can, in a very real sense, make or break your picture. So I took my time with it. 3 full days finding the right music and mixing it together with the vocals. A large portion of my audio work goes completely unnoticed by viewers, and actually that's a sign that I'm doing it right. I had to make sure audio levels were properly calibrated for the entire movie's runtime. This proved difficult because different music tracks are sometimes mixed at different decibel levels, and the volume of the voicemails I selected, they were all over the place. So I had to make sure to normalize the audio and integrate all of the elements together in a way that felt natural. The loudness or softness of each piece of music, of each call, needed to be intentional. It took a while, but eventually I got there. Next, I needed to create captions. The audio quality for most of the voicemails was poor, sometimes difficult to parse, so I knew I would need to provide subtitles and closed captions to make it easier for audiences to understand what the callers were saying. This actually had a double benefit of providing viewers with a sort of a central eye point, so I could keep their attention focused mainly on the messages. To be completely honest, this was the most boring part of production. Transcribing every sentence with proper accuracy, it took several days. It was quite a grind, and there really wasn't much glamour in sitting at my desk plugging away at a keyboard. I made sure to keep these captions within the proper safety margins and to fit them in a central text box so that the reader's eyes didn't have to scan the whole screen. It's an old trick that subtitlers use to increase the speed with which one reads. Admittedly, I made a lot of typos, so I had to go back and correct these, but eventually I had the audio locked and the captions locked. This led to the next step, which was to add visual elements. I decided to select stock footage that kept with the theme of each individual call, but I had to make sure the clips didn't detract from the listening or the reading experience. I also wanted to avoid using a lot of faces. Something about landscapes and obscured people would give the audience the creative freedom to imagine what each caller looked like, and this went a long way toward making the viewing experience more serene. I sifted through hours upon hours of stock footage libraries to track down clips that would work well with the music and with the calls. In total, I sourced about 280 pieces of video. I realized the subtitles were hard to see against certain backdrops, so to make them easier to read, I placed a gradient between the video layer and the subtitle layer. Yes, I know if I wanted to, I could have released this thing without any visual elements at all, but where's the fun in that? Having moving pictures added another layer to the experience. Sometimes I was even able to integrate sound effects from the clips into the the audio experience, and although it took 2 weeks to do, the end result of combining video and audio was definitely worth the extra effort. At this point, I had a rough cut completed and ready for review. I'd been working on the video for almost a month now, and I was worried that I was getting tunnel vision. This happens a lot. You look at something so long that you don't notice a lot of the imperfections or the glaring issues. So I took my rough cut and I asked my wife to watch it to see if the movie was conveying the message that I wanted. She gave me great feedback, perhaps most importantly pointed out a couple of typos that had flown under my radar. So with a list of needed corrections, I got back into the editing booth. I corrected the typos, fixed the editing blips, added some end credits, and, having spent a month on the whole process, exported the final cut. After that, I dropped the movie on my channel, and from here, I'm just focusing on promotion. Driving traffic to a 47-minute video is tough, especially when you've got the YouTube algorithm working against you. I'm doing my best to get as many eyes on the movie as possible, but I know that the audience for something like this is small. I am planning on submitting the documentary to a few film festivals. I'm working on getting together some kind of local screening for later this year. I'll probably announce more details when they become available. Overall, the experience of creating voicemails from strangers was incredibly rewarding. This all started out as just something to do with my summer. The idea that I began with wasn't exactly what I ended up with, but in the end, I think I enjoyed the final film way more than my initial expectations. The truth is, most documentaries, they take years and years of planning and craftsmanship, and I know that this movie, it just isn't in the same ballpark as these large-scale projects, but at the same time, I think I'm better off for having put it together. If you want to watch the documentary, check the links provided. It would mean the world to me if you watched it in its entirety. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Let me know what you thought about it in the video's comments, and be sure to share it with others. After that, if you find yourself on a bit of a documentary kick and you want to watch more great stuff, you should check out this video's sponsor, CuriosityStream. They're a subscription streaming service that offers over 2,400 documentaries and nonfiction titles from some of the best filmmakers in the world, including tons of exclusive originals. Their selection covers areas like history, science, nature, technology, and more. Unlimited access is just $2.99 a month. It's one of the most affordable streaming services out there, and instead of an overstuffed collection of movies you'll never in a million years watch, you'll have a curated lineup of profound stories and ideas. If you're still unsure, let me give you 30 days for free to try it out. Sign up at curiositystream.com/AustinMcConnell and use the promo code AustinMcConnell during the sign-up process. CuriosityStream is available worldwide, and checking it out helps support my channel, so have at it.